can see right through a powdered face on a painted fool. Let me slip through. Why you tryna hold me back? I'm just tryna move up front, little more this, little less of that. Let me come through. I'm tired of being in the back. I'm just tryna move up front, little more this, little less of that, yeah. They tell me I was born to lose, but I made a good thing out of bad news. I don't worry about people in my face. I hit them with the style and grace, and watch the ankles break. Whoa, whoa. I know you wish I would fade away, but I got more to say. Lord, they pray. Ow! Let me slip through. Why you tryna hold me back? I'm just tryna move up front, little more this, little less of that. Let me come through. I'm tired of being in the back. I'm just tryna move up front, little more this, little less of that, yeah. They tell me I was born to lose, but I made a good thing out of bad news. All day, all night. Alright. All day, all night. Alright. Oh, why? All day, all night. Oh, why? Alright. Oh, why? All day, all night. Oh, why? They tell me I was born to lose, but I made a good thing out of bad She said, be honest with how you feel. I said, that's easier said than done. I said, don't worry about the future. She said, that's easier said than done. Well, it is. 'Cause true love, it ain't easy, no. She said, just show me this love is real. I said, that's easier said than done. I said, just trust the way you feel. She said, that's easier said than done. Well, it is. 'Cause true love, it ain't easy, no. True love is one in the end. Yes, it is. True love is one in the end. Yes, it is.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jacinta Gonzalez. I am part of the programs team here at Media Justice, and we are very excited to welcome everyone to WTF is going on with Trump's big bad bill?
Yes, and I'm Ramsha Sajid, Senior Learning Specialist at Media Justice. Thank you so much for joining us for this encore installment of our WTF series, Uncovering Trump's Big Bad Bill. Some of you may have heard headlines related to what Trump calls the Big Beautiful Bill, but it's really one of the biggest wealth transfers to the rich that could happen in our lifetime. For the sake of today's webinar, we're going to call it the Big Bad Bill. Over the course of today, we're going to go over what is in the bad bill, what does the big bad bill have to do with tech, surveillance, AI, and more, and how can we stay informed and get involved?
Thank you so much, Ramshan. And there is going to be so much to talk about because this big bad bill is packed with a lot of things that are incredibly concerning. But before we get into it, we just want to hear from y'all. So if as you're joining the call, as you're jumping in, if you want to add into the chat your name, your pronouns, where you're joining from, and if there's anything particular that made you decide to join today. We do want to kind of hear from you, and we're excited to get into a lot of conversation and good questions. So as folks are joining, please introduce yourself in the chat. Okay, folks are trickling in. We're waiting for the shy ones to introduce themselves. We know we got Pam from San Bernardino, got folks from Boston, amazing. Okay, well, as folks are introducing themselves, I guess I will pass it over to you, Ramsha, to get us started.
Yeah, let's dive into it. Jacinta, can you explain more about what the big bad bill actually is and what Trump is trying to do with this bill?
You know, as at per usual, Trump is trying to do a lot. And what we've been seeing in this bill is that they have thrown in so many different elements into it. They are a lot of them are pretty horrendous, are very, very scary. And so it's actually been a hard thing to be able to actually summarize what's in it because there's so much. And so folks have probably seen, and as you already mentioned, Ramsha, like one of the primary things in it is extending the 2017 Trump's tax cuts, right, and continuing to transfer wealth that way to the wealthy. But we've also seen them go in and try to make cuts to Medicaid. We've seen them cut SNAP benefits and add work requirements. We've seen them also create exclusions for the child tax credit so that if there was a child with a parent who's undocumented, for that family to not be able to receive those benefits. We've seen a tremendous weakening of any sort of environmental regulations, selling off of public lands. We've seen taxing of remittances. So what we're seeing is that there's a huge laundry list and a lot of different elements of the Trump sort of grouping, right, is putting in their elements and their agenda into this bill. And so for today, we are going to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the issues around surveillance and how AI and the tech industry are trying to make some of their moves. But we should know that this bill is moving lots of different agendas with a lot of different stakeholders. And so that has caused a lot of instability. Folks are trying to understand how to relate to it, trying to block all different types of provisions. And so that's leading to a lot of confusion, which is why we thought it was so important to actually have a space to have a deeper dive to talk about the issues around surveillance and the tech oligarchy around what kind of money moves and also policy moves they're making right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacinta, for breaking that down. I'm really curious to hear from our audience what aspect of the big bad bill y'all are most concerned about. So we have a poll for you. Um, which aspect of the big bad bill are you most concerned about? Is it the tech policy and the AI provisions? Is it immigration policy, the rich getting richer, or cuts to social benefits like Medicaid? Or the child tax credit, as Jacinta mentioned earlier. If you don't see the aspect of the bill that scares you the most, then please feel free to drop it in the chat. We know it's really frightening times, and as Jacinta mentioned, there's so many different types of policies that are rolled into this one bill. So please feel free to voice in the chat if you have some that you're thinking about that are most alarming to you. We'll give folks a bit more time to choose what's the most alarming aspect of the bill to them, and then we'll close out that poll in 3, 2, 1. And let's take a look. Like, what did y'all think was the most alarming? I'm really interested to see, like, 39% of you said cuts to social benefits like Medicaid. 28% of folks said cuts or said tech policy and AI is most concerning. And 17% said immigration policy. Well, for the folks who specifically are interested in tech policy and AI and immigration policy, you are definitely in the right place. That's really our focus of today, is to understand the tech impacts as it relates to both immigration and artificial intelligence. Jacinta, I know you have an extensive background working in immigration issues, from your work on the No Tech for ICE campaign with Mi Gente to your work in New Orleans, working with migrant workers and supporting their families. Can you share more about why immigration is a major aspect to the Big Bad Bill and how it connects back to the tech oligarchy?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and yeah, I'm with the crew of all of the above, in terms of what's happening. I think we're really starting to see, this agenda take life, where it's really making sure that we're investing in policing and surveillance and deportation and taking away from basic services that all of our communities need. And it's just very clear what the intention and what the move is. Um, this bill includes a lot of really scary provisions around immigration. Obviously, it includes a lot of investment to increase the number of folks that are detained, increase the number of deportations. And as this administration is moving forward with an agenda of mass deportations, this bill is creating the infrastructure and the funding for that to happen. Um, but I think what might not be seen as obvious, it's not just detention numbers and detention beds, or actually personnel for the Department of Homeland Security. There's also a lot of money in here that's going into the pockets of the oligarchy, right? Not surprising, they see this as a business move, and they're making sure that they're making a lot of money off of that. So when we first started to talk about in the WTF series, the oligarchy, right? We talked about some characters like Peter Thiel and David Sachs and Joe Lonsdale. And these are three of the venture capitalists that were really involved behind Palantir, right? And Palantir is one of those companies that is making a lot of money off of the federal government right now, both in terms of creating one big database to be able to search people, but also specifically creating programs for ICE and their deportation machinery. So some of y'all might have already heard of Palantir. We did a lot of campaigning against Palantir during the No Tech for ICE campaign. And they continue to just be a tremendous force of harm in immigrant communities. But it's also been really fun to see folks understand who they are and target them, right? So shout out to all the amazing organizers in California that were arrested for protesting at the Palantir's offices. Shout out to other folks that are coming up with good trouble in the next couple of weeks. So Palantir is definitely a company, and the tech bros behind Palantir are some of the main profiteers right here. But then there's also characters like Palmer Luckey. And so Palmer Luckey is not only known for his fashion sense, but he's also known for being part of the oligarchy, and owning a company called Andro. And Andro, for a long time, has understood that they can make a lot of money off of the Department of Defense, but also off the Department of Homeland Security, and has been doing a lot of work along the border, in terms of thinking about how to get more investments around that. So Andro Industries is backed by Trump, but also by Peter Thiel, by Mark Andreessen, and even JD Vance. So this network of folks who have understood how to invest in these companies that are now going to be getting a lot of money from the Big Bad Bill is really important to know and to kind of track, because Peter Thiel has a lot of connections, again, both in Palantir, but also in Andro Technologies, and is part of like promoting this agenda and this type of business.
Yeah, wow. And it's so interesting because I recently saw Joe Lonsdale on CNBC getting platformed on the news to talk about how there needs to be a regime change in Iran. And things like that only show us that these contracts with the government will only go up, right? And that it's really a wild time we're living in, that these oligarchs are getting platformed to talk about foreign war policy on mainstream news. Um, but that's its own whole conversation. I digress. Let's transition to talking a little bit more about the big bad bill and how these tech oligarchs will benefit from it. So if the bill passes in the Senate, it could nearly triple Custom and Border Protection's budget from 2024 to more than $60 billion in supplemental funding over the next 5 years. It would increase the funding of surveillance tech on both the northern and southern border, which ultimately translates to multi-million dollar contracts for private firms that these oligarchs own. And while some of these contractors have been around for a while, the growing role that the tech oligarchy has in the Trump administration in making physical and digital barriers for migrants and for people in general is just really alarming. The bill allocates 46.5 billion for the construction and installation of a physical border wall. And it also includes like associated surveillance technology in that 46.5 billion. So you can think of like cameras, lights, and sensors. And then in addition to that, there's 2.8 billion allocated for other surveillance technologies along the southwest, northern, and maritime borders, which, is intentionally kept vague, right? Like to say other surveillance technology, but not really deepen what we actually mean by that and define it in this bill.
And as we go through the numbers in this bill, you'll start to see that there's so many categories exactly like that, Ramsha, that are just sort of kept really broad and really general, precisely to be able to generate these types of contracts. And one thing that I think is really important for folks to just remember is a lot of times we think like, okay, well, it's just going to be used at the border, right? Like that means that if I, am living in Chicago or somewhere else, that means that that's not going to affect me. But I think that it's really important to kind of be able to track how Border Patrol, right, CBP, but also DHS agencies in general, then use this technology against everyone. I mean, one, the actual border actually includes 100 miles into the United States and airports. So that starts to include a big chunk of the country in terms of where Border Patrol can use this type of surveillance. So that means communities that live in the border area, right? Folks that live in cities that are close to borders, folks that are living close to airports. These are all technologies that will, or if you're traveling through airports, these are all technologies that will eventually be used on you. And it's really important for us to remember as we're thinking about other moments where there's been intense organizing and intense mobilizations, the surveillance of those mobilizations many times has come from Border Patrol. And so as we continue to organize, as we continue to see Trump use his office, right, to try to retaliate and use violence against anyone who is speaking out, it's important to kind of track the way some of these contracts are being used. And the second thing is many times Border Patrol will start to use the technology and then through subgrants make it available to local police departments. And so we start to see how there's a real pipeline going from Border Patrol to local police departments to use this technology in our backyards, in our communities against, regular folks that are trying to organize or trying to just go about their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a report Media Justice published that we made alongside our partners at Little Sis and Surveillance Resistance Lab and Acre back in 2022 that was called DHS Open for Business. And it discusses how federal grant funding from the Department of Homeland Security trickles down to militarize local police departments. So that's so interesting and so relevant to the times we're living in. Can you share more about how much we're looking at here in terms of the numbers of what kind of further investment in the surveillance state we could see if this bill passes?
Yeah, another thing that we saw in the bill that I think is really, really concerning is having more investment in surveillance in the form of monitoring people's identities, right? And so that looks a lot like the biotech or biometric technology that folks are using in the databases that they're putting in. So we've seen in the bill that there's $673 million designated for the deployment of biometric technology. So this means facial recognition, this means iris scans, this means DNA. And a lot of this biometric information is then put into the automated biometric identification system, IDENT, that is not just for, immigration authorities, but is accessed by the Department of Justice, any state and local police department. So we've seen Border Patrol take DNA samples from kids with no authorization, and this is where that information is going, right? And that information can then be used for local criminal investigations, for different types of prosecutions that they want to include. So we've seen that they are in general trying to create more and more data on people and putting it into centralized databases to be able to track people's identities. And the thing that's just incredibly unfair about it is there are no actual protections in terms of how that data is being used. And so it can be really dangerous for a lot of folks. Um, I would also say that the bill allocates $12 billion with a B to provide grants to states. So some of what we were talking about earlier in terms of sort of this pipeline going from Border Patrol and federal agencies into the hands of local police departments. We see it again here with this particular having these grants that really embed immigration enforcement within state level and local police authority structures, right? And so again, this is one of the ways that then local police departments can say, well, I'm working with the Department of Homeland Security and I'm giving this other surveillance technology that I'm going to implement and use in my community at large. And so those some of the things that are really, really scary around how they're figuring all of this out. And then they also have $700 million set aside for information technology for removal operations. There's already been a lot of news coverage of, for example, the new contracts that Palantir has gotten to be able to support raids. And I don't know if folks saw on the news today that Stephen Miller is actually that has a lot of influence in terms of immigration policies and has been behind setting quotas and doing some of the most harmful things in terms of the mass deportation regime. Um, but he has had to disclose how much he's been investing in Palantir because, of course, now there's conflict of interest. And so we're starting to see again how some of these characters are pushing these policies and then investing in the same companies that are going to conduct that and profiting off of it directly.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds almost like the government is a customer to these tech companies and to all of these oligarchs. Um, could you share more about how this bill could affect the state control of migrants and people being detained? I mean, people locally everywhere, especially in major cities, are seeing these huge ICE raids. And it's had deep impacts in our communities. And I'm wondering, how if this bill passes, how could that exacerbate that?
I mean, the main way it's going to get exacerbated is going to be around the capacity of ICE to surveil and conduct raids and then be able to detain people to be able to deport them. Um, I think the other thing that's just incredibly scary about this bill is that there's so much money, particularly for the Department of Defense, to also conduct activities that would support any type of border operations. And so I think there's about $5 billion. Yep. Okay. They got it on screen. That are being put in there, which include like the temporary detention of migrants in DoD installations, which includes Guantanamo Bay, that can potentially include like the Secot in El Salvador and other of the military installations that we've seen. And so again, some of the infrastructure that is going to be needed to continue to expand the mass deportation system that is set up is going to be coming here from both DHS, but also the Department of Defense.
Yeah. Yeah, it really sounds like the bill would increase and deepen a lot of the most alarming things that we've seen since Trump's inauguration as it relates to ICE raids, but also the militarization of the police and the intensifying of harmful migrant detention practices that we've seen in the last few months. Now as we sort of transition to talking more about the artificial intelligence implications in this bill, which I think 17% of you named as being the most crucial to you, it's important to note that there is a whole infrastructure around artificial intelligence, immigration, and warfare that we are in right now. There are mass investments in artificial intelligence by the military and police that are proposed in this bill.
Yeah, and honestly, we were like going back and forth as we were preparing for the webinar of like how much information to give. And so we're just going to have a couple of slides for folks to kind of see some of the numbers. But as you go through, it's just 1 billion here to innovative technologies, 2 billion for the Department of Defense to have commercial technology for military use, 450 for AI systems and naval ships. Like as you start to go through, you see billions and billions and billions of dollars being spent on military technology and war. And of course, it's no coincidence that this is happening as you were talking about, Ramsha. Like we have people like Lonsdale and other folks really sort of pushing for there to be more military attacks, for there to be more war, while they're also making the case to actually have this type of money invested here. Um, so, again, we're not going to go through each and every line of all of the numbers, but folks can start to see that there's 200 million here just for 200 million for the AI to exacerbate the audits of the financial statements of the Department of Defense. These are all contracts that again are going to the same companies that are going to be making those evaluations. And so that's why we've seen so many people then make the investments back into those same corporations that are writing the bill as we speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so wild. It's so wild that we have all of this money in the US government, but not enough for universal healthcare, not enough for robust public transportation, not enough to fund schools, right? Like it's a very intentional funneling of money more to the rich through this bill.
And it's been interesting to watch, sort of folks on the right trip over themselves in terms of trying to defend this type of investment and this type of money, right, flowing when they're talking on one side about cutting costs and balancing the budget, and then contributing so much to the debt by making these types of investments in surveillance technology and war technology. So, I think that's part of the reason why we wanted to call for this webinar is because it's such a hard and dangerous time, but there's also some opportunities to be able to push back and stop some of it. And so that's actually, I guess I was like, oh, wait, I was going to pass it to you, but it's passing to me. So that part of what we want to do in this next section is actually talk about not only how they're making a play to get our tax dollars to make themselves even richer, but also they're trying to figure out how to push to deregulate the industry even more. Not that there's been a lot of regulation, but they're pushing even further in that direction. And one of the most harmful parts of the bill is this uh, part about moratorium on the regulation of AI. And for that, we're super excited to have with us Kate Brennan, who's the Associate Director of AI Now Institute, with us to kind of break down some of these parts, explain to us what's happening. So welcome so much, Kate, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Can you see and hear me okay?
I think we can. We can. Yay.
Great. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And for folks who might not know, y'all just released an amazing report. We're going to put it in the chat that has really been talking about how billionaires and how regulation around AI is working. So could you maybe give us a little bit of background, Kate, just to kind of situate ourselves on like, give us some background on what this moment means for AI policy and how did we get here with this big bad bill?
Yeah, absolutely. And to give a very brief introduction of what we do at AI Now, we're an independent research agency. We study and figure out how to push back on the current trajectory of the AI industry. We take no tech money, which is super important because, that's who we're targeting. And we want to use our research and tools to figure out how we can equip organizations on the ground to fight back about the narratives. So a lot of what we do is kind of try and diagnose what's going on with the AI industry in ways that are tangible and accessible. So I'm excited to be here to talk about what's going on with the big bad bill because there's a lot. So, I think first, how did we get to this moment? And I want to braid together, 3 different threads. First is exactly what you said, the deregulatory current that is pulsing through the Trump administration right now, intended to boost AI acceleration and adoption. We just saw slides to kind of lay out that case exactly. And to be clear, a lot of this was set in motion by the Biden administration and around harmful AI uses, but it's impossible to overstate the effect that the election and this administration has had in setting the clock back. And particularly relevant is that the administration has falsely positioned tech innovation as incompatible with regulation. And in doing so, they have failed to pass any federal or comprehensive AI regulation or even basic fundamentals like privacy laws. So that's really important for the conversation today. The second thread is a complete about face that we've seen from the AI industry when it comes to AI regulation. And it's not surprising, but it's worth calling out because our lawmakers are fairly obsessed with treating CEOs as messiahs of the problems that they've created. So some of us may remember 2023 when Sam Altman was begging Congress to regulate his company OpenAI, and then in the span of 15 months, changed their tune entirely and pushed back on even basic state regulation. So this is also very important context. The moratorium did not come out of nowhere. It is industry approved and advocated for. And then thread number 3 is that in the wake of this, states have taken up the mantle to propose and pass legislation regulating AI. And there have been some strong bills that are trying to prohibit the worst use cases. So this is also key because, the industry saw that states were imposing accountability measures when Congress was not, and so therefore something needed to be done. So these 3 threads kind of bring us to this moment with the big bad bill. And so what is the big bad bill doing for AI? It's instituting a moratorium on state AI regulation for 10 years, meaning that states would be prohibited from enforcing any legislation that restricts or otherwise regulates AI models, AI systems, or automated decision systems. So in other words, cannot do anything for 10 years. And to be clear, any laws that advance AI acceleration or government procurement are perfectly okay. So yeah, so I just braiding these together, it's like it's exactly how we got to this moment. Like you see industry saw the writing on the wall that they might be held accountable at the states. They played directly into this narrative that innovation requires no regulation. And then they petitioned to the Trump administration, to effectively block us from doing anything.
It's super terrifying to see just how opportunistically they are just jumping on any space to move and promote this agenda and push it in such a forceful way. And I love your calling out of Sam Altman because I do think that he's been such a big force in a lot of this and in the narrative around it. But can you kind of like describe to us a little bit more like who are the cast of characters that we're dealing with? Who has been like Sam sort of proposing and kind of pushing some of the things that are in the bill?
Great question. So I'll start with the government players and then I'll talk about the industry players. So, if the moratorium had to have a face, it would be Senator Ted Cruz. He has been kind of pitching this for months now. In early May, he kind of teased in a Senate committee hearing to Sam Altman and other industry leads that he was going to introduce a bill that would institute a 10-year learning period before states could regulate AI. About a week later, we had the House Energy and Commerce Committee introduce a provision into the budget reconciliation bill. This despite opposition from many groups, including 40 bipartisan state attorneys general, the budget bill passed the House. I'll pause here to say, you might be wondering what a bill prohibiting AI regulation relates to the budget. And early on, it didn't. And this will get, I think, a little bit into the procedure, but I think it's really important for where we are in the fight right now, because many advocates at the time hoped that the provision would be removed under a wonky procedural tactic called the Byrd Rule. And this strikes any provisions in the bill that are unrelated to the budget. So because the moratorium didn't have a relationship to the budget, there was hope it would be birded out. But the Senate did something very strategic, and specifically Senator Ted Cruz led the charge here. And he amended and modified the moratorium provision. So instead of a blanket moratorium on regulating AI, the Senate linked the moratorium to access to federal broadband funding, and that's high-speed internet access. So now the text says that any states that enforce laws regulating AI are ineligible to receive federal broadband funding. So you also may have seen news this weekend that the moratorium passed a hurdle and can be heard in the House. And what this means is that Cruz's provision was successful. It will survive the Byrd Rule, and it will be allowed to be heard on the floor. We were expecting this because by linking the moratorium to this budgetary matter, however dangerously, it's going to satisfy. So now the question becomes one of policy, and it's very interesting because there's been a lot of movement on this side and a lot of movement from some unlikely alliances, which we'll get into. Some key Republicans have come out against the moratorium. And this is really important because remember where we were before this, this deregulatory Trump admin faction saying that, we shouldn't be subject to any regulation at all kind of speaks to how sharply the terrain can shift. Senator Josh Hawley has come out against the moratorium. The House Freedom Caucus, which is a conservative bloc of Republicans, issued a letter against. J.D. Vance has hedged and said he didn't think the provision will make it. Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that if she read the bill, she would vote against it. And the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, advised in a New York Times op-ed against the moratorium, which we will maybe come back to. But this is a very different tune than what we're seeing, right, with Sam Altman and OpenAI blocking any legislation. So to be clear, this is a welcome antidote, of course, because what we were seeing before was so dangerous in its rhetoric. But at the same time, we can tease through some of the incentives behind some of this outcry. There are two other players that I want to call out that are particularly important right now, and that's Senator Ed Markey and Senator Josh Hawley, as I mentioned, both of whom have promised to introduce a provision that would strike the moratorium from the bill. So this is where we are today. The current fight is trying to support an amendment striking the provision.
Such an interesting cast of characters. Adding this to the list of reasons to dislike Ted Cruz. But can we talk a little bit more about this, Anthropic CEO saying no deregulation? What do you make of some of the trends in terms of who's pushing for it, who's pushing against it, and sort of what that means for the AI industry overall?
Yeah, the Amodei op-ed, I think, is a really interesting spot to kind of tease through the broader industry trend. We wrote an op-ed talking about how it's kind of exactly a page out of the industry playbook. So, why would an AI firm like Anthropic come out and say that they are pro-regulation? And just for context, I think I said this, but Amodei came out in the New York Times, said, I'm against the moratorium, you should regulate us, and you should institute a federal transparency standard. So if you actually take a look at what he's saying, on its face, it looks like he's pro-regulation. But what he's actually proposing is almost as insidious as the moratorium itself. He's proposing a weak sauce law. It's a federal law, a super weak transparency standard. And importantly, he's doing that in the context of saying, if the federal government passes this transparency standard, no other state would be able to. So like that's moratorium 2.0. And to be clear, this weak sauce federal legislation is just as dangerous as, no legislation at all. And this is a larger trend. AI firms kind of read the tea leaves. They see that the current is moving towards regulation. We're hearing this chorus of voices coming out, the House Freedom Caucus is coming out. So they step in and try and shape the narrative in their favor. And that's often undercutting bolder reforms. When the proposal on the table is a 10-year ban, a transparency standard might sound and appear as middle ground. But this is industry shaping the narrative. And we've seen this before. We're speaking about police technology and facial recognition technology. In 2019 in Washington, there was a chorus of voices who were coming out to try and institute a ban on facial recognition technology in police departments. Microsoft engaged, not by killing the measure. They came out and said, oh, yes, we support it, and then instituted their own weaker version of the regulation, which ended up passing. And this is just, playbook 101, substituting industry co-opted regulation to undercut bold reforms. So I think that is how we should read the Amadei op-ed. That is how we should read any industry players who are kind of coming out and seeing where the fight is happening. And then there's also, states right now are facing strong industry lobbying to try and block legislation at all. And I don't want to undermine that too. That is like another trend that we are seeing is industry helicoptering in, trying to prohibit or block even baseline protections in the states. We saw this in California with OpenAI when they came out against a basic safety bill in California, playing on the tune that it was going to disrupt California's innovation economy. So the headwinds are strong for sure, but now more than ever is not the time to bend to industry co-opted regulation.
I feel like this point is so important to sort of remind folks on, because I think we've also seen it many times in different, like not only around tech, but I think sometimes when we see Trump taking a particular position, industry or Dems will try to like say that they're in opposition to it, but really what they're actually doing is like you're saying, setting it a little bit lower than whatever his is, but still not at all where folks would want the regulation to be. And it's an important trap, I think, to continue to push back against. And it's also just it's a good noticing in terms of how they're shape shifting around the moment in terms of what they're putting out for.
Right. They're always going to support what is going to, deepen their pockets and ensure that they have as few accountability measures as possible.
And the other point I just want to highlight what you're saying is like the state lobby stuff has been intense, and we've heard it from like very different parts of the country where really any time that they're trying to get into make sure sanctuary provisions are cutting off data, make sure any industry is present in the states, and that's what they're tracking the threat, right? Which I also think is just important for all of us to kind of understand. We might not always understand that we're making a good play, but they're actually checking where it is that there's energy and wanting to shut that down. But as we're looking at this panorama, I mean, what do you see as the likely outcome? Like, how do you really sort of see this play out? Are there opportunities to kill it? Do we just have to accept our fate? What do you see as sort of the moves to be made in the next couple of days, not weeks?
Yeah.
But yeah, just how do you see the bill playing out in the near future?
Yeah, for sure. So there is hope right now that the moratorium will fail because it is bad and unpopular policy, but it's not certain. So the number one priority right now is to strike the provision from the bill. As I mentioned, there's hopefully a provision that is going to be introduced, and we need to shore up support for that provision. truly the most important thing to do is call and write to senators expressing your support for this. And I know sometimes it could be like abstract, like call your senators, as we've talked about. But there is a toolkit that I believe we will share that is doing such strategic targeting of sway Republicans. These are Republicans who have indicated their willingness to vote against the moratorium, and also shoring up support from Democratic senators who have yet to publicly oppose the moratorium. And what the toolkit does is also helps amend to the issues that those particular legislatures are most attuned to. So, for example, there are key Republican senators who rely on broadband funding, and cutting this, coercing them into making a deal to relieve broadband funding at the cost of a moratorium is something that their constituents really care about. So targeting that narrative and shoring up our votes is currently the strongest strategy. The ACLU also has an excellent national messaging tool that I believe we can share to quickly contact your legislatures. And then more broadly, I mean, I have been personally inspired by hearing people from so many different walks of my life coming out concerned about this. Today, I read a letter from faith leaders who are worried about, the AI moratorium. And because this moratorium will truly affect so many people's material lives and issues, it's such a meaningful moment to bring groups together who are organizing around a range of issues. And in the toolkit, we also have some specific language around that, like, for example, for folks who are organizing around data centers, because if this moratorium fails, states won't be able to protect their citizens from the issues we know are coming, like increased rate hikes and air pollution. So, bringing these communities together and then building that network that we can continue to fight along the lines no matter what happens with the moratorium. Hopefully it fails, and then we can take those organizational pathways onward.
Yeah, to be transparent, we were making jokes about the call your senator thing, but I will say it does seem like this, if there is a time and a place for this strategy, it is now, in the sense of like it can be both, like you're saying, some of the Republicans that have said that, but also some of the Democrats that honestly have not quite gotten the memo of how important this is. So particularly looking to y'all, Colorado, and other folks, if we have folks on the call, you want to do a cough, you want to show up, want to bring them a snack and let them hear your thoughts on some of this. But this is actually the time to sort of turn up on that because they are actually trying to understand how to approach it and what to do. We're getting some good questions over here also about just talking about the state strategy, Kate. And I don't know if you wanted to get into a little bit of like what has been some of the movement at the state level that the industry is now trying to push back against? So either if there's like sample bills or what have been ways that people at the state level have been able to try to pass things to try to regulate the industry.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I can bucket them into maybe three broad categories, but there's so many and there's so much state work. But three come to mind as like a particular threat for this moratorium. Some of the strongest state bills that we're seeing are those that are banning and prohibiting the most harmful AI use cases. So bills being introduced, for example, saying that an AI cannot deny your health insurance claim. Like, this is common sense. Bills and laws saying that, we can't use your biometric facial surveillance to charge you a different price in a grocery store. These are like situations where AI should never be used in the first place. And these are the bills that would be on the chopping block. Second, there has been an attempt from states to try and regulate AI model development. So, from the AI firms who are developing models. And again, this is one of those tricky ones where a lot of these bills have already been weakened by industry, right? But they do exist, and these are directly threatening to AI firms who are trying to institute a federal protection that no, you can't touch model development. Models are just a general tool. They don't inherently cause any harm. But we know that we should be regulating at every single stage of the stack. And then the third bucket that I'll combine is privacy and data, because, if you strike at data and privacy and surveillance mechanism, you're striking at the fuel of AI and like the heart of it. And states have been moving on that. And that is deeply threatening to the business model of AI firms. And so, states from California and Maryland have been moving on strong data protection laws that would be at risk for the moratorium and for any weak legislation that comes afterwards that would prevent states from working.
Thank you for that breakdown. And I think it's been really important to watch some of the stuff at the state level, particularly around data. I have some stories over here in Illinois, but you try to touch their data, they come down quick. And they're not afraid to use any sort of threats or any other types of dirty strategies as we're seeing. So it's an important thing to be watching, and honestly to continue to be on the fight of, no matter what happens here, because the states is where, if it were to pass, implementation would be a particularly important place for us to think about how and where to organize. But I guess just to kind of like close us out and round us off, I mean, Kate, what if we were to get the bill to fail, what would happen next? What should we be staying vigilant about? Or on the flip side, if it were to pass, what would be our path for resistance and how people can take up the fight in their own state?
Absolutely. So I'll start with if the bill fails. If the bill fails, we know that something just as harmful is looming in the background. And that's what I've said a few times about federal preemption law, which is a fairly wonky legal term, but basically means that Congress will pass a law and that will preempt or block states from moving. And if this is weak and this isn't instituting protections for people, then we're in no better place than we were if the moratorium went through. And this is not speculation. Ted Cruz, once again, has already promised to introduce legislation doing this. So this is why it's all the more important right now to organize ourselves around the issues that we care about and get that, get our arguments and our policy positions in place, because we are going to need to mobilize as soon as this fails, because what's looming is we should see it as consistent. And so much of what we talked about in the big bad bill around police technology and investment in military AI and unlocking the federal government data reserves to be able to use for private military defense tech companies, all of that, we would be removing the ability of states to actually implement any regulations. So if the bill does pass, or even in this fight, we spend a lot of time thinking about what the broader strategy across the board is for resisting this trajectory and reclaiming the public's agency over AI's future. I believe we will link in the chat our roadmap for action, where we outline 5 broad areas where we see are kind of the strongest intervention points for how we can fight back. I'll call out just a few high level, but also happy to go into that just for time. But maybe I'll say the first one because I think it directly relates to what we were talking about earlier. And this is centering how AI systems are working to make all of our and working people's lives worse at the expense of us, at the enrichment, of the oligarchy. So, I saw in the comments, people are worried about Social Security benefits and what is going to happen with the bill, and threading these ties of seeing the ways in which AI is being used to actually undermine people's access to critical benefits already is so important. And nowhere is this more tangible than in the violent and coercive way that AI is used against immigrants in this country. So we are already we are already doing this work of centering and continuing to do it. And yeah, I'll stop there since the link is there and there's much in the chat, but yeah.
No matter what happens with this bill, there will be a path of resistance to take. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of those options. We are sharing the link in the chat. And then also want to tell folks, if you're on the call and you're like, wait, I've been trying to do X, Y, or Z thing in my state, this is why we're putting these types of things on to start to get to know each other, to be in contact. So we'll also put our contact information in the chat if folks wanted to reach out with any other more uh, nerdy policy questions and or tactical questions about how to move in your state. Definitely down to continue that conversation. Um, Hey, any last messages you would want to share out before we round out? I think as we're looking at this panorama, any last words of advice or inspiration that you would like to share with us? I'm not sure if you were able to hear me, Kate, but if you have any last messages or just last
Oh,
things
that was for me. I was looking at the chat.
No, it's all for you. You are
Sorry. Me like ready to see the minutes of inspiration. You know, it, the I am hopeful in this moment, even though we are facing very, very strong headwinds, because I think the consensus is coalescing around baseline and common sense reforms, and that all of us are organizing now on pushing the strongest and boldest and seeing through industry for what it is and where they've taken us these past 10 years. And so I encourage everyone to continue the anger that you feel about even just the idea of blocking our government's ability to hold these firms accountable for 10 years and using that to tap into you know, whether it's organizing, whether it's worker organizing, if you're, you know, facing any AI systems in your workplaces, whether it's calling your legislators to figure out what the strongest proposals that are happening in the states, we would love to engage with you and figure out how we can translate some of our analysis and our action plan into helping your community. So yes, please reach out, and really excited to be in this fight with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us, Kate. If you're not following AI now, this is when you should start, and take a look at that amazing report and like all of the tools that are in there because they really are such an enormous gift. So yeah, thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here.
Asinta.
For everyone that's part of this yeah, conversation and fight. You will see in the chat that you can see all of the recordings and viewing guides for the WTF series are there. So for your members, for your leadership, there's also a bunch of different toolkits and different resources that we can share for how to use this information. Stay tuned. We will be sharing different ways to take action in the next couple of days and be sharing updates on how the Big Bad Bill progresses. But for now, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll be in touch.